If telekinesis is real, it has to come from somewhere measurable. It can't just float in from another dimension. It can't be magic. It has to be cells, voltage, chemistry, and pressure, the same toolkit every other animal on Earth uses to do what it does. To make the analysis useful, I'll be giving our hypothetical real-world Mewtwo a proper Latin binomial, pseudo-mu psionica, from the prefix pseudo, meaning false, the phylum root mu, referring to its ancestor, and psionica indicating its proposed psychic abilities. That's the rule, and it's a brutal rule, because the moment you apply it to Mewtwo, an enormous problem appears. Mewtwo, the iconic legendary Pokemon from the first generation games and the original animated film, is built on a body plan that looks deceptively simple, about 2 meters tall, lavender gray skin, bipedal, thick muscular tail, outsized cranium with a distinct ridge running down the back. But under the hood, this thing is supposed to lift trucks with its mind, melt metal, read thoughts, and project psychic energy fields strong enough to flatten buildings. And it was supposedly created in a laboratory by splicing genetic material from a tiny pink ancestor called Mew. So today, I'm going to ask the question Pokemon has never quite answered. If a real biologist had to build Mewtwo from scratch, from real cells, real organs, and real chemistry, could it actually be done? I want to be precise about this. I'm not asking whether Mewtwo could exist as a cartoon. I'm asking whether the underlying claims, psychic, apex predator, lab created from a feline ancestor, capable of physically manipulating matter at a distance, could actually be implemented in a body that obeys the laws we already understand. Anatomically, I'll be assuming 3 real biological structures that Pokemon never explicitly maps out a hyper-developed parietal organ on the cranial ridge, analogous to the parietal eye in Tuatara, Sphenodon punctatus serving as a psionic detection sensor, an enlarged frontal and prefrontal cortex housing the telekinetic neural architecture, and a specialized tail with concentrated ganglionic mass, that cylindrical structure visible in canon design that probably functions as a secondary cognitive processor. From here on, when I say pseudo-Mew, I mean the real-world biological version of Mewtwo. The game version stays in the game. This is Evolved Codex, the series where I take iconic creatures from movies, games, and myths, and reimagine them through real-world evolution and biology. To answer whether Pseudo-Mew Psionica could actually be built, we will evaluate it across 4 key categories, each scored on a 10-point biological plausibility rating. First, habitat adaptability. Where on Earth could a 70-kilogram psychic creature survive long enough to be relevant? Second, dietary compatibility. What does an organism with a brain, this oversized, need to eat to keep its lights on? Third, competition and predation. How does Pseudo-Mew hold up against Earth's existing apex predators, including the species that supposedly built it? And fourth, reproductive success, the hardest question of all, because Pseudo-Mew, by definition, is a clone. Can a lineage of clones even sustain itself? And make sure you stick around until the end, because after that, we'll explore 3 ways Pseudo-Mew Psionica might evolve over time to better solve the impossible engineering problem at the core of its existence, including one branch that gets significantly more dangerous than the original, Mewtwo. Let's first take a look at where on Earth a real Mewtwo would even be able to live. In the games and the films, Mewtwo gravitates toward isolated locations, remote islands like Cerulean Cave, abandoned laboratories, mountain hideaways like Mount Quena. From a purely biological perspective alone, those choices are actually consistent with what we know about large-brained, energetically expensive predators. As you might recall, animals with disproportionately large brains tend to be ecologically rare. Sperm whales, Physeter macrocephalus, which carry the largest brains on Earth at around 7,800 grams, live in deep, open ocean where prey is dense but human contact is minimal. Elephants, Loxodonta africana, the largest terrestrial brain owners at around 5,000 grams, range across vast savanna and forest territories with low population density. The pattern is clear and well documented. Big brain plus apex status equals low density per unit area and a strong preference for isolation. So where would Pseudomyu cyanica actually fit on this planet? Realistically, we're looking at 3 habitat profiles. The first is temperate mountainous forest, the Rockies, the Caucasus, the Carpathians, the Himalayan foothills, anywhere with low human density, year-round prey availability, and stable mid-range temperatures. Pseudomyu, like any large-brained mammal, needs a thermal envelope that doesn't drain calories into shivering or panting. The second profile is large continental cave systems, especially in regions like the Slovenian Karst Plateau or the limestone networks of southern China, where stable temperatures and total darkness offer permanent concealment. Cave dwelling has supported large mammals before. Cave bears, Ursus spelius, occupied this niche for hundreds of thousands of years before going extinct around 24,000 years ago. The third profile, and the most fitting for a creature with a lab origin, is the abandoned infrastructure niche research stations, military bunkers, depopulated industrial zones. Pseudomyu is the first species I'd realistically predict to actually exploit this niche, because it's the only species we're modeling that knows what those structures are for. But the deeper issue is concealment. Pseudomyu cyanica has a habitat problem that no other apex predator on Earth shares. It cannot afford to be observed. Once humans know it exists, the population gets studied, tracked, captured, controlled, or eliminated. That means the species' fundamental habitat constraint is not physical, it's informational. A real pseudomyu would need a habitat that allows it to stay completely off the human map. And the human map currently covers about 85% of the planet's land area through satellite imaging, drone surveys, and continuous citizen sighting reports. Studies of large carnivore concealment, for example, snow leopard, panthera, uncia, research conducted across the Himalayan range show that even highly cryptic apex predators leave detectable signatures every 7 to 12 days through tracks, kills, and territorial marking. Pseudomyu, weighing 70 kilograms with measurable thermal and possibly electromagnetic side effects from telekinetic activity, would have an even harder time staying hidden. The longest a real pseudomyu could plausibly remain undetected in a modern landscape is somewhere between 6 and 18 months before satellite imagery, drone patrols, or a single curious hiker catches it on camera. Then there's the temperature problem. A brain the size pseudomyu would need for sustained telekinetic activity somewhere in the 1,500 to 2,000 gram range, based on neural scaling laws, applied to vertebrate cognition generates enormous waste heat. That favors cool, dry climates and active behavioral thermoregulation. Pseudomyu could not live in the tropics. It could not survive in deserts during summer. It could not handle the humidity of a swamp ecosystem because evaporative cooling would fail. Its habitable range shrinks to maybe 12 to 18% of Earth's land area when you combine the thermal envelope with the concealment requirement and the prey density requirement. Habitable, yes. Common, absolutely not. So while Pseudomyu cyanica could find places to live, those places are narrow, fragmented, and constantly shrinking under human expansion, scoring Pseudomyu a habitat adaptability rating of 5 out of 10. From a dietary perspective alone, the question stops being about food in general and becomes about brain fuel specifically. Pseudomyu cyanica is, fundamentally, a metabolic crisis with legs. Here's why. Human brains use roughly 20% of total body energy at only 2% of total body mass. That's a 10-to-1 ratio, the most expensive tissue in the human body by an enormous margin. Apply that same ratio to a pseudomyu with a 1,500 to 2,000 gram brain on a 70 kilogram body, and you're looking at a brain that takes up 2.1 to 2.9% of body mass, but consumes potentially 30 to 40% of total caloric throughput. That's before you add the energy cost of telekinesis. After you add telekinesis, the brain becomes the only thing the rest of the body is feeding. Now, let's talk hard numbers. A 70 kilogram apex predator with this neural profile would need roughly 6,000 to 9,000 kilocalories per day at resting metabolic rate, with spikes to 12,000 or more during active psychic operation. For comparison, a wild Bengal tiger, Panthera tigris, of similar body mass needs only about 3,000 to 4,000 kilocalories per day. So we're looking at a creature that consumes between 1.5 and 3 times the daily calories of a tiger, despite being the same size. The bottleneck is not body mass, it's brain fuel. And brain fuel comes with very specific constraints. Where do those calories come from? The diet would have to be hyper-concentrated and nutritionally precise. Lean ungulate meat alone would not work. Pseudomew needs fat. Brain tissue runs primarily on glucose during sustained operation, but the body needs lipid reserves to maintain that glucose throughput between meals. So the realistic diet profile for pseudomew would mirror the diet of obligate carnivores with high cognitive demand felids like jaguars and pumas, but skewed toward fattier prey species. Beavers, otters, deer with high seasonal fat reserves, and crucially, salmon during spawning season would all be on the menu. Pseudomew would be a strategic seasonal feeder, hitting fat-dense prey at peak nutritional value rather than eating opportunistically. There's another wrinkle that doesn't apply to ordinary predators. The neurotransmitter load required for sustained telekinetic activity, whatever the underlying biological mechanism, would consume specific amino acid pools, tryptophan, tyrosine, phenylalanine at unusually high rates. A real pseudomew would probably need to supplement standard carnivore diet with specific protein sources rich in these aromatic amino acids. Studies of bottlenose dolphin, Tursiops truncatus, brain chemistry show that highly cognitive cetaceans selectively target prey species with optimal neurotransmitter precursor profiles. Pseudomew would do the same, but the menu would be even narrower. We're talking about an animal that can't just eat what's available. It has to eat what's nutritionally precise, which means pseudomew would behave less like a tiger and more like a hyper-selective gourmet. Wrong prey, wrong week of the season, no psychic combat. And then there's the worst dietary problem of all, telekinesis itself. If implemented through any plausible biological mechanism, high-voltage neuromuscular fields, microactuator ion gradients, biologically generated electromagnetic field manipulation would burn an additional 1,500 to 4,000 kilocalories per hour of sustained use. The bombardier beetle, Brachinus crepitans, fires a single defensive chemical jet that takes hours to chemically reload. Pseudomew, scaled up by a factor of 1,000,000, would face a similar reload bottleneck. The species would have to choose between using telekinesis sparingly, like a one-shot weapon, or eating constantly to maintain combat readiness. There is no middle ground. A 2012 study on metabolic ceiling in apex predators found that sustained energetic output rarely exceeds 4 times resting metabolic rate before tissue catabolism begins. Pseudomew would be brushing against that ceiling every time it used its signature ability. That earns Pseudomew a dietary compatibility rating of 4 out of 10. The food technically exists. Affording it on a daily basis with the right nutrient profile while also fueling psychic combat is the hard part. Now we get to the question that surprises most viewers. With telekinesis as a weapon, surely Pseudomew psionica is unbeatable, right? Wrong. From a competition standpoint alone, real-world Pseudomew would face a much harder fight than the Pokemon canon suggests. The reason has nothing to do with raw power. It has everything to do with the energy economy of sustained combat. Let's break it down. In a single instantaneous engagement, Pseudomew wins almost any matchup. A telekinetically projected force capable of moving multi-ton objects could disable a tiger, a brown bear, Ursus arctos, or even an adult orca, or Sinus orca, in a single strike. But here's the catch. That single strike costs hundreds, possibly thousands of kilocalories. After 2 or 3 sustained engagements in a single day, Pseudomew would be in caloric debt, running on stored glucose, and probably beginning to catabolize its own lean tissue to keep the brain online. That's a brutal vulnerability. Earth's existing apex predators have specifically evolved to manage their energy across long time frames. Pseudomew did not. Pseudomew was designed for showcase combat, not endurance. Compare it to a wolf pack, Canis lupus. Wolves don't dominate prey through raw individual power. They dominate through coordinated harassment over time. A pack of 6 to 12 wolves can chase a moose for 8 to 14 hours, conserving each individual's calories while burning through the prey's reserves. Pseudomew, alone and burning calories at 2 to 3 times the metabolic rate of a wolf, simply cannot afford that kind of prolonged engagement. In a sustained competition for the same territory, the pack outlasts the psychic, and the wolf pack is going to keep coming back, because wolves remember territorial losses. Energy economics, not raw power, decide who eats next. What about apex felids? An adult Siberian tiger, Panthera tigris altaica, at 250 to 300 kilograms, possesses bite forces of approximately 10,000 newtons, and is capable of stalking and killing prey 5 times its body mass. A 70-kilogram pseudomew would technically lose a direct physical engagement with such a tiger unless telekinesis was used, and the moment telekinesis activates, the caloric clock starts. In a one-shot encounter, pseudomew wins. In a habitat shared with multiple competing predators, pseudomew gets gradually pushed out of the best hunting grounds because it cannot afford to defend territory at the same intensity that ground predators can. Then there's the parietal organ I mentioned earlier. The hypothetical psionic sensor on the cranial ridge would give pseudomew a major detection advantage against ambush predators. The tuatara, Sphenodon punctatus, uses its parietal eye to detect light variations and possibly polarization patterns invisible to lateral eyes. A scaled-up version in pseudomew could conceivably detect electromagnetic fluctuations from approaching animals, biological electrical signatures, or even subtle thermal variations through the rock above a cave system. This is a real ecological advantage. It means pseudomew would rarely be surprised. But detection without resolution isn't a win. Pseudomew could see threats coming. It still had to afford the response. What about predation on pseudomew? Adult pseudomew is essentially immune to ordinary predators. Any animal that gets close gets thrown across the room. But juveniles are different. The cranial brain mass develops slowly. Telekinetic capability would not be reliable in cubs under 18 to 24 months old, similar to how venom delivery systems mature slowly in juvenile snakes. During that vulnerability window, juvenile pseudomew would be susceptible to bears, leopards, wolves, and large birds of wild, felid juvenile mortality rates run between 50 and 65% in modern apex cat populations, and pseudomew juveniles would have it worse because their psychic toolkit is offline during the most dangerous years of their life. And then there's the species that built pseudomew in the first place. Human. If a real pseudomew lineage emerged from a laboratory and escaped into the wild, the response from the institution that created it would be immediate and total. We can predict this with high confidence because we have actual case data escaped research primates, accidentally released invasive predators, even early SARS-era containment exercises. Modern containment protocols would track, isolate, and either capture or eliminate any psychically active escapee within a few months. The same species that has the technical capacity to create a pseudomew has the technical capacity to find one. Competition and predation rating, 7 out of 10. Adults dominate any single fight. The cumulative engagement math, plus juvenile vulnerability, plus the species that made it, decide everything in the long run. The last category is the one that finally answers the real question, not whether pseudomew psionica could exist, but whether it could persist. And the answer here is much grimmer than people expect. Let's start with the obvious problem. Pseudomew, by definition, is a clone. The Pokemon canon specifies that Mewtwo was created from Mew DNA through genetic engineering, which means the original pseudomew would be the only individual of its species at the moment of creation. That's a population of 1. A population of 1 is functionally extinct from a genetic standpoint. There's no genetic diversity, no breeding partners, no path to a stable lineage. The species ends with the individual. So for pseudomew to actually become a real species, rather than just a real animal, somebody has to clone it again and again. Many times. But here's where cloning biology gets ugly. Real-world cloning data, starting with Dolly the sheep, Ovis aries, in 1996, has consistently shown that mammalian clones suffer from shortened telomeres, premature cellular aging, and elevated cancer rates compared to naturally conceived individuals. Dolly herself lived only about half the normal lifespan of her breed before being euthanized due to progressive lung disease and arthritis. Subsequent cloned mammals, cats, dogs, horses, primates have shown similar patterns. The mechanism is partially understood. Cloning starts with the donor cell's epigenetic state, which is older than embryonic state. Even with reset protocols, residual aging signals persist through the cloning process. For a pseudomu lineage built entirely from cloning, this means each generation would arrive with the genetic clock partially pre-wound. Over 5 to 10 generations of pure cloning, the lineage would accumulate dysfunction faster than it could compensate. So, pseudomu needs sexual reproduction to become a stable species. That requires at least 2 unrelated individuals, ideally a population of around 50 to maintain minimum viable genetic diversity. Conservation biology data, for example, the genetic recovery work done on the Florida panther, puma, concolor, coryee during the 1990s shows that populations below 50, effectively breeding individuals, enter rapid decline through inbreeding depression. Symptoms include reduced fertility, increased birth defects, weakened immune function, and eventually population collapse even in the absence of external threats. For pseudomu to escape that fate, the lab that created the original would need to deliberately produce at least 50 viable, genetically distinct clones, which means introducing engineered variation across the founding population. That's a substantial technical demand, but it's not impossible with modern gene editing tools. Let's assume it's done. Now, pseudomu has 50 unrelated individuals breeding sexually. What does reproductive output look like? Felid reference data tigers, lions, jaguars suggest gestation around 100 to 110 days, litter size of 2 to 4 cubs, and a generation time of 4 to 6 years. Apply that to pseudomu, and you get a slow-growing population at best. But there's a twist. The energetic load of pregnancy and lactation on a female pseudomu would be catastrophic. Pregnancy increases caloric demand by 25 to 40% in mammals. For a female pseudomu already running at 6,000 to 9,000 kilocalories per day, pregnancy would push that to between 7,500 and 13,000 kilocalories per day. Maintaining that intake while pregnant, partially immobile, and unable to use telekinesis safely without risking the pregnancy would be enormous. Many gestations would simply fail because the female could not meet caloric demand. That alone halves expected reproductive success compared to a normal apex felid. Then there's the question of whether psychic abilities are even heritable in the simple sense. The Pokemon canon doesn't really address this, but if telekinesis is encoded by a specific multi-gene neural architecture, that architecture would have to develop reliably in every offspring. Even in real animals, complex cognitive traits show wide phenotypic variation. Some pseudomu offspring would be more powerful than their parents. Others would be effectively non-psychic, born with the cranial ridge and the parietal organ, but lacking functional connection between them. Selection pressure across many generations might gradually stabilize the trait, but the early lineage would be a patchwork of varying ability. Many cubs would die in their first telekinetic combat attempt because their neural architecture simply wasn't tuned correctly. That earns pseudomu a reproductive success rating of 2 out of 10. The lineage is mathematically possible, but biologically catastrophic. Most pseudomu lineages would burn out within 5 to 10 generations. So let's tally the biological plausibility scores for pseudomu psionica, our hypothetical real-world Mewtwo. Habitat adaptability, 5 out of 10. Dietary compatibility, 4 out of 10. Competition and predation, 7 out of 10. Reproductive success, 2 out of 10. That averages to a final biological plausibility rating of 4.5 out of 10, which translates to this. A real Mewtwo could exist as a single engineered individual. It could be powerful, terrifying, and locally dominant, but it could not become a species. It could not sustain a lineage. It could not survive the long-term math of biology. Pseudomu psionica is, in the technical sense, a magnificent dead end biologically possible, but evolutionarily doomed. Now, that doesn't mean evolution is finished with the concept. Evolution adapts, and if we somehow created a small viable population of pseudomu psionica and let it evolve under realistic selection pressure for the next million years, three very interesting branches start to emerge. Because evolution doesn't accept magnificent dead end as a final answer, given enough time and the right selection pressure, even a species this constrained will find new equilibria. So let's run the speculative evolution simulation forward and see what kinds of psychic creatures would actually emerge if Pseudomute psionica was given 1 million years, a small founding population, and a planet of its own. The first branch we'll call the empath lineage, Pseudomute empathica. This is the lineage that solved the energy crisis by going social. Pseudomute empathica evolved cooperative telepathy, short-range, low-cost mental communication, shared across a stable family group of 8 to 14 individuals. Think bottlenose dolphin pod cognition, Tursiops truncatus, scaled up into a true psychic network. Combat telekinesis was selected against in this branch because it was simply too expensive. In its place, social telekinesis dominated fine-grained manipulation of objects, coordinated hunting through shared mental mapping, and possibly even proto-language transmitted directly mind-to-mind without sound or symbol. Pseudomute empathica lost the apex predator aesthetic. It gained something more dangerous in the long run, the cognitive infrastructure of a sapient species. This is the lineage that, given another 1 million years, might actually start asking questions back and answering them in our own languages, which is exactly the lineage you do not want roaming the planet uncontrolled, because by the time you notice it's there, it's already negotiating. The second branch we'll call the phantom lineage, Pseudomute minor. This is the lineage that solved the energy crisis by going small. Pseudomute minor shrinks back toward Mew's original body plan, roughly 4 to 8 kilograms, the size of a house cat. Brain volume scales down proportionally, but the brain-to-body ratio actually increases relative to ancestor. Telekinesis range collapses from tens of meters to just a few, but the precision improves dramatically. Pseudomute minor becomes the world's most efficient ambush hunter, using short-range telekinetic strikes to immobilize small prey instantly and stealth telekinesis to silently move past potential predators undetected. The caloric demand drops to manageable levels, somewhere around 800 to 1,200 kilocalories per day, which means Pseudomute minor can actually maintain a viable population across diverse habitats. This is the lineage that, given enough time, would genuinely succeed. It would be everywhere. It would be nearly invisible, and the only reason most people would never see one is that it would never let itself be seen. And then there's the third branch, which is exactly what you'd expect, and yet somehow worse. We'll call this Pseudomute tyrannica, the tyrant lineage. This branch went in the opposite direction from Pseudomute minor, bigger, hungrier, and far more psychically aggressive. Pseudomute tyrannica scales up to roughly 150 to 200 kilograms, with cranial mass increasing by a similar factor. Telekinesis range pushes outward to several hundred meters. Combat output scales to the point where Pseudomute tyrannica could plausibly disable a small herd of large herbivores from a kilometer away. But the caloric demand spirals proportionally upward. This lineage cannot sustain a stable population. It burns through its own prey base. It exhausts its own thermoregulation. It collapses every ecosystem it touches within a few centuries, and then it collapses itself. I'm an Anomalocaris. What do? Pseudomute tyrannica unmakes biomes, and then it dies. For 2 or 3 brutal generations, it is the apex of apex predators. After that, the silence and the empty forest. So that's 3 speculative futures for the Mewtwo lineage. Pseudomute empathica wins on cognition and long-term persistence. Pseudomute minor wins on stealth and population stability. And Pseudomute tyrannica wins on raw destructive supremacy until it consumes its own habitat. Of the 3, the one that should keep you up at night is the empath, because the empath is the lineage that, eventually, evolves the capacity to read minds and decide what to do about what it reads. If you enjoyed this deep dive into building a biologically plausible Mewtwo, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss any future content. And if you want to further support the channel, consider becoming a YouTube member today. You'll get sneak peeks of upcoming videos, early access to new releases, and custom emojis of your favorite creatures from the channel. Drop in the comments which Pokemon you'd like me to decode next. I've already got Charizard, Gyarados, and Lucario on the shortlist, but the audience pick gets prioritized. And if you think the Phantom lineage is the most likely real-world outcome of a Mewtwo lineage left alone for 1 million years, tell me why down below. Until next time, Stay curious, and I'll see you all in the next video.